I am a vessel for the unseen to be seen. Art or creative expression is the closest thing we'll understand to what God feels like. When somebody is purely creating for the sake of it, it's like touching God. You cannot go inward and see what you see and not be of service to the greater good.
Welcome to Push Yourself podcast. It's for people and their stories. Today, I'm joined by Sheila Darcey, an artist, a guide, and the founder of SketchPoetic. Her work helps people move through the pain, reconnect with their truth, and express what words can't always hold. But rather than explain it for Sheila, I would like to let Sheila do the talking. I think about a lot how often we rely on titles or roles to explain ourselves. But sometimes what we do lives deeper than words. It's a feeling, a calling, a process. Sheila, if you couldn't use the words like art, sketching, or healing, or therapy, how would you describe what you do?
I am a vessel for the unseen to be seen. And that's how I would describe it because, and it's interesting, you said feeling, calling, all these beautiful words. And that's exactly how it feels for me, whether it's through art, through facilitation, or through teaching, or through guidance. My entire purpose and mission of arts and healing is to allow people to see the unseen. And we can do that through mark making and through sketching or through any sort of creative expression that is visual. But that's what I do.
I do want to give great thanks to Carlos Rodriguez Perez who connected us. Carlos was one of those early seeds. I have to thank Carlos for bringing us together. And there
Yeah,
was a reason.
he's like a brother to me. Him and I had a very quick connection as soon as we met for so many reasons, but he's just his heart and his soul. And we have obviously a shared passion for creative expression and healing. And it's so great. I was so grateful for him to connect us. So I'm looking forward to see what emerges from our conversation because I have no idea where it's going to take us.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Same here. I like to kind of plan let's see where this goes. I'm gonna kind of wing it, so to speak, in a sense, with a couple of notes on the side.
Love it.
So, kind of starting with the work that you're doing right now, you created a space. You created something that doesn't live on a page. It lives in people. It seems like potentially you're bringing something out of people. You're nurturing, so kind of pulling it out, so to speak. And I've been thinking about how sometimes we hold space for others and hopefully not losing ourselves in the process. So, can you go a little bit deeper about the work that you're doing now? What does it look like when someone enters that space with you, whether it's digitally or in person?
I love this. I love the way you frame that. It's such a beautiful question and the way that you are kind of unpacking and really surfacing the depth of my work. So a lot of the work that I do is really ultimately, I see it in two different pathways. Is one is the emotional journey, and then second is the artistic journey. So what I do is I try to connect with people in a way that gets them to feel, see, and express their emotions and their feelings, but also through connecting with the body. So when I talk about emotional journey, I'm also talking about the somatic, physical aspect of it. So I don't want to limit emotions to just the a verbalization of it, but it's also about how does it feel in your body. And then the artistic journey is interesting because I meet people from all spectrums of people that say they can't draw a stick figure to all the way to incredible artists, but may or may not be comfortable with their emotions. And so those are the two spectrums in which I connect with people. Now, the biggest thing that I do that I feel makes my guidance different, or certainly my workshops, is I come in with a very, very simple understanding that the wisdom is always within you. The answers are within you, not me. You can ask me a question, but I will often, if not always, ask you a question in return. Because for me, it's less about what's the answer. The question is, how can I help people ask the questions that they need to ask of themselves to see what they need to see? And the interesting thing is, art does that. When you're making marks, you can't help but have a dialogue about it. And even if the dialogue is judgment or critic, right? Or like, I don't like this mark, or this is so ugly, which is a very common initial thought when people are sketching is because it's such an uncomfortable feeling. But part of the reason I do the work I do is I allow people to play in their discomfort, which is a duality, a paradox, right? When we're uncomfortable, you wouldn't often think about playing. So that's really what I am. I feel like I'm a conduit to people's inner world, and I do it through an external medium, which is art. So that's why I'm able to play both in the inner and outer worlds of people, but I do it at the pace in which they're able to allow me in. Because I don't do anything other than listen to what they're asking. I use this term, calling me in. They call in what they need. So I go as deep as you need me to go, and I can stay at the surface of if that's where you want. But you will walk out of one of my sessions, whether it's an in-person workshop or a digital Zoom, you will walk out of it exactly what you need because I know and trust that you came into my life, just like this podcast, at the time you needed to come into my life so that we could both learn something from each other. So that's the last thing I'll say. It's very symbiotic to me that anytime, whether I'm the guide and they're learning, I'm always the student as much as they are, right? That's the way I view everything. So that's the way I talk about my work. It's very much a conversation and it's very much co-creation in action.
Creation in action. And I really like what you said about being in that discomfort, staying with that discomfort. And to me, I come from the perspective of sports, having grown up being playing sports, being around sports. Maybe in the sense that was my refuge. And now looking back on it, maybe I've gained a certain perspective. I've gained an appreciation for discomfort. I think oftentimes people specialize in different areas. Let's use ourselves as an example. There are people consider art, maybe athletic sports, physical activities as wholly separate. But I think if you go beyond that level, you can see how things are interconnected. So to me, when you say discomfort, I'm thinking, okay, I'm thinking of myself in discomfort of, let's say, even simply something is working out. You discover yourself
Yes.
in terms of strength, physical strength in doing that and in that exercise, lifting that heavy weight. I think there are parallels in a lot of areas of life. You know, in art, it's the discomfort. You also discover something about yourself. Maybe not necessarily strength. I don't know what you think about that, but you discover still something about yourself in that sense of discomfort. Maybe you gain some kind of strength. You gain some kind of knowledge about yourself, or maybe you even grow as a human being. What do you think about that?
Oh, it's so interesting because when we first talked, I allow my intuition to guide me in conversations, and as you were talking about the analogy or certainly the compare, the what do you call it, complementary experiences of sports and art, which most people wouldn't, and I love that you were able to connect the two. The word that came up for me was performance, and in both practices, whether you're practicing sports or practicing art, where it becomes challenging is when it's about performance, because sometimes we forget the joy of it. So running, the joy of running and getting that flow state and that state of just that, that beautiful flow that you get into is very similar to when I'm sketching. I get into flow. But the moment that I'm focusing on the performative nature of it, so whether it's an audience or I'm keep competing against somebody else and forgetting that this is about me, this is about me being stronger. This is about me being better in terms of my how I'm doing it from yesterday. That dialogue is always happening in the journey of arts and healing, because whether you're trying to refine your technique and getting deeper into the practice, or whether you are trying to make meaning from it, every day brings in a new challenge or a new reflection, much like sports, right? If you every and this is what the other word that came up for me is plateauing. Whenever you're athletic and whenever you're an artist, you end up inevitably going through that plateau where your muscles aren't feeling more, you're not getting stronger, or you're not, there's a point where you just plateau and you get frustrated. I remember the very beginning of SketchPoetic. It was such a new practice for me, and I started feeling all this transformation. And then a few months in, it started to plateau where every sketch felt the same, and it just felt like I was starting to lose the joy in it. But I realized that is the discomfort. I was so performative driven my entire life that spirit and my sketching was saying, Sheila, you really need to sit in the discomfort of plateauing. What does it feel like when you're not actually getting that depth and that growth and that You just have to sustain right now. And I don't even remember how long that sustainment was, but I was very uncomfortable. So every part, so when you bring up sports, that metaphor really came up for me of that plateau and how performative we can be when we think about the audience and not, we forget about us.
Wow, there's already a few things I want to explore. You mentioned flow in preparation for our conversation. I started to think, okay, I'm seeing parallels. It's art. I've in my youth I wrote poetry, and I was trying to think, like, how creative am I? Maybe I just have a different modality, but I did kind of anchor myself in this idea. I know what flow looks like in a sports state, athletic state.
Yeah.
For example, playing basketball, the flow state could be there's somehow at a moment if you're playing with other individuals in a team setting, there's that communication that happens on a nonverbal level where it's like intuition. You're just looking at the eyes. You kind of intuitively know what everybody will do. And there's those maybe seconds, minutes when you can grasp that flow. You're just in sync, and it's kind of a euphoric feeling. But how does the flow state look like for you?
Well, you're also expanding on the word unseen for me. This is really important because I can imagine when I say I'm the vessel for for the unseen to be seen, and somebody doesn't understand that term. You touched on two things that are unseen: intuition and energy. When you are playing team sports and you become in flow with your teammates, there is an unspoken, unseen chemistry and energy that is flowing through, and you just trust it. And that is another thing. Trust is unseen, but you feel it. It's a feeling. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to get people to remember, because we're so bombarded with noise, both through our eyes and through our ears, that our mind becomes chaotic and noisy. And we just forget the intuitive nature of not only our gut and our, people talk about intuition being the third eye. Our bodies are intuitive. I mean, that's why sports is such a great metaphor for it, because you watch a team play or you just watch an individual person do their thing, right? Or runners going down, and you just know there's so many unseen things happening to get them to perform the way they're performing. It's like, and also, I mean, the other thing that's coming up for me is thinking about all the energy that has brought them to that moment. So when you were talking about the playing basketball, I used to play basketball in high school. What makes you want to throw it to that player versus this player? It's not just what you see that they're open, right? There's something energetically that you felt prior to even seeing them. That's what I'm talking about. So when I'm mark making, I genuinely see those connections. And if you often watch my time lapse videos, you catch me sketching in different parts of the page. I jump around, much like the ball on a basketball court, because that ball is energy. That ball is being tossed from one player to another, and it ultimately wants to get to the hoop, right? And so for me, that hoop is the unconscious mind wanting to be seen. That's the metaphor. If you want to, I can use metaphors all day long because I see everything as energy.
I remember reading somewhere talking about exactly everything is energy. And there is a saying, I don't remember who said it, but I think somebody did. I'm not just making it up. It seems to be too great of a thing to say, but some people are able to turn art into a science or inversely science into an art. And I think this is
Yeah,
just kind of like, you could play basketball. This could be a science. You learn how to do steps initially, but once you kind of reach a certain point of knowledge, you do things automatically. You may be in sync with the energy that you're referring to. You have those moments of flow when you are reacting and you're not thinking. And that's when it kind of
exactly.
turns into an art.
Reacting and not thinking.
Right.
I would even, for the art, from an artistic interpretation of what you said, expressing and not thinking. So reacting is a sports thing, and I get that because you're reacting to something in a teammate or something like that. But when you're sketching or creating for yourself, the reacting is you and your higher self. There's this beautiful conversation that happens. So
So, what are some of the barriers, like with individuals and the groups that you work with? I know it can be easy to get people out of their comfort zone because I think
yeah,
ultimately, like my view on life is, you know, we're suffering because we are resisting the natural way that we should behave, kind of we should operate. So there's I love Alan Watts.
Yes.
And there's a idea he talks about. I think it was in the book of To Go Against Knowing Who You Are. Talked about as the ocean waves, the universe peoples. So I think the problem is with individuals who suffer languish, and there's saying people live in a quiet desperation because they're rejecting their natural place in the universe. But how does that
Yeah.
manifest in the work that you do, and how do you bring people out of that?
Yeah, I'm just going to build upon what you're talking about as a way to answer it. So let's talk about the natural state of who we are. And I love the way you poetically, and whether you gave yourself credit or somebody else said it, it doesn't really matter. I think that's exactly how what I see all the time in my workshops is there's resistance. And what is resistance really? Resistance is the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual manifestation of something that you're not quite ready to do. So readiness comes with that. So when I think of resistance, immediately talk about readiness. You might desire to sketch poetic. You might desire to quit your job and follow your dreams. But if you're not ready, you will find a way to resist it because we're human. And there's a lot of compassion and grace in why I'm saying that. However, on the other side of that is the word natural state. Like, what is our natural state? And that's really what Sketch Poetic is for me. That whole reason I exist and the whole reason I do what I do is try to get people back to their childlike state. So when we were children, we were imaginative, we played. If we're lucky, like there are some, and I just wanted to caveat, there are some children that grew up in an environment where they never got to play. So I want to just put an asterisk on that. But if you were privileged enough to have a childhood where you got to play, you got to imagine, you got to be free, that is our natural state. There is no resistance because you're playing. There's no boundaries. And even in when we play, as we get older, play becomes structured. Play becomes rule based. That's no longer play to me. That is playing with rules. But the part of playing that we all love is the unexpected, unbridled, unedited, joyful expression of it. So what you're saying is so profound because that's exactly what I see in my workshop participants. They resist for a couple of reasons, and I'm going to go back to the two paths. Emotional resistance, they're conscious and they're aware of their feelings, but really terrified to express it. And then some people are really good at expressing their feelings, but don't want to go deeper. They don't want to go inward because they're fine expressing their anger, they're fine expressing their sadness through depression or whatever. But if you ask them to go to the root cause of it, I don't want to see it. Right? So it plays on both sides of that coin. And then the other path I told you was the artistic path. The other resistance I see is somebody doesn't know how to draw a stick figure or they're extremely talented, but both of them have one thing in common. They have an expectation of what it should look like, and they have a critic or judge that says whatever they do is going to be not good, not perfect, it's going to be ugly. So these are all types of resistance. But the resistance is being in their natural state of being a child, a childlike wonder, the awe. And so that's where I spend a lot at the beginning of my workshop doing what I call visual warm-ups, just to get people out of their head and forget that this isn't even about art. You worked with Carlos, as you said, and Carlos and his work will tell you, we got to get out of here when we create. We got to get into our hearts. And it's just such a conceptual idea, but our hearts aren't thinking, they're feeling. It's all about feeling for me. And that's what we have in common. Carlos and I talk a lot about the feeling of the creative expression. So that's how I would answer that. But it really is a beautiful extension to the metaphors that we just talked about. But yeah, I see this a lot. Resistance equals readiness.
You mentioned Carlos, and in that conversation with Carlos, he did mention, if I remember correctly, um, individuals who are unable to act, and this has to do with creative art therapy in the group setting, as Carlos had described it. Those individuals who maybe have any kind of going through some kind of mental issue, kind of putting on that all-encompassing term, are unable, my words, to engage in play. I'm trying to be truest to what Carlos had said. And I think this in itself, the manifestation, as I'm seeing it, that inability to play is is a symptom of some kind of malady. So that's kind of how it hits from two perspectives, Carlos's perspective, your perspective, but ultimately it is play, which is the natural state that we as adults grow out of.
Yes, 100%. It's that simple. I say it's that simple, but it's really hard to unpack and get back. It's conditioned out of us to not play anymore because there's just too much judgment laced with it. There's too, and I have yet to meet a person that struggles with play that doesn't have a critic or a judge, whether it's them or whether it's their teacher, their parent, their spouse, their partner. The critic is the ultimate killer of curiosity and play. And interestingly, curiosity is the antidote for it. The moment we start to become curious, we're so if we're focusing more on asking the questions of why I'm uncomfortable or asking the questions of why I cannot play, you start to forget that you're not comfortable because you're so busy inquiry. That's why one of the things I'm working on is I'm working on a project with AI that's going to help people have their own inner dialogue using AI to help prompt you versus the other way around. Because it's really around the idea that when we play, we're not meant to have an outcome, but we are just some outcome based. As we get to be more adults, we become so outcome based. Everything has to be done, or this has to have a means to an end, or God forbid you do something for the sake of just doing it, right? It has to have some sort of payoff, some sort of end results. Like it's always external. There's something there, and that's what we're losing. And then the other thing that's coming up for me that I feel is important to express because you asked about my work is more and more what I'm seeing of why people cannot play. It's so simple. Is people don't know how to be bored anymore. People do not give themselves the space to be bored. And this is coming up a lot with children and adults. Is this productivity environment we're in? Social media has got us to anytime we're uncomfortable at a line and at a bank or at any pause in our lives, what do? We get our phones because we're so uncomfortable with the boredom of life. And that is actually where imagination lives. It's what happened to us as kids. We were bored out of our minds sometimes. So we'd have to imagine. And so social media has really killed that because it's the easiest thing to do when we're bored to get that phone out.
I couldn't agree more. I think we both are parents. My son is 12, and I do have, try to limit, uh, to have a balance. I know I have to limit, for example, his social media use, but I also realize I can't take it all away now to have it ostracized by his peers in a sense, because that will, in a way, take away sense of community for him. So it's that very delicate balance. How do you straddle of giving, not taking away that connection of social with his peers? I guess it's all about being a parent. You have to try to straddle, and it's never perfect. But to
Yeah.
go back slightly, when you mentioned uh, adults having an issue being result oriented, I turned 40 about a week ago. And the, the reason I say this, I feel like I've reached a point in life, and I'm wondering, does anybody else going through the same more or less age experiencing this too? I feel for quite some time now, all these cliches and sayings that I've heard throughout my life, now they're making the crystal clear sense. You said what you just said a moment ago. It's that result oriented. I'm thinking of it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Like, oh, now that makes absolute sense. It's about what you do along the way. It doesn't matter where you're going. It's just you have play at whatever you're doing, and the outcome will take care of itself.
Yeah. Well, the outcome is the being. So this is you like Alan Watts, right? The anybody that follows people that really speak on that kind of that realm of spirit will talk to you about this idea of just being versus doing. It is hard to learn that. I still continue to learn it. And by the way, I'm human. When I say people use the phone, I'm one of those people. I'm addicted to the phone as much as everyone else. Being better at it. I'm being conscious of it, but I'm not nearly immune to the addictive nature of having a phone in particular. So I just wanted to call myself out to say that it is a constant practice to be present and being versus doing is I mean, if you ask me, one of the core principles of Sketch Poetic is the act of being, because the sheer act of being in the moment strips away the outcome. It strips away any expectations, and it strips away judgment, because you're so in the being of it that stuff can't live. You're just being, and the being could be you're in grief. The being could be dark. It doesn't have to be, but because you're so in it, the other stuff that comes with it just kind of falls away. And that's what I mean by play. You would never think of those types of heavier emotions and then associate it with play. It's not typically, other than art therapy, right? We're talking about, like, if you talk about art therapy or just therapy in general, people put it in that bucket of, oh, I can talk about it and feel emotions that are uncomfortable. But most people wouldn't associate it with art. And more people are talking about it, right? People, where the one creative expression where people do get it is music. People intuitively understand when you listen to music or when you create music, you can create it and be devastated. You can create it and be imprisoned and be, a prisoner of war. You can create it and be in a, like during COVID, when I remember that scene when the Italians were on the balcony singing opera, and music does it. Music's very clear. People get music. Visual arts hasn't quite gotten to that point yet where people understand that when you're creating a visual expression, whether it's painting, sketching, it's the same thing as creating music. You're just balancing the inner world with the outer expression of it. That's what we're doing all constantly, but it's being in the moment of it and just allowing the beauty of it to come through.
I wonder, people who come to sketch poetics that come to you, do they know what they're really seeking? I would assume some
Oh,
do, but some probably come to it, to the modality that you offer, trying to figure out what they're not understanding. I'm asking this as someone who is, yes, I would describe myself as not creative in the artistic art drawing sense. Yeah, I'm the individual who says I can't draw stick figures. I would struggle at that level. What happens if an individual is unfamiliar with drawing, with sketching, and what are some of the breakthroughs that they've had? What have they discovered?
wow. That's, listen, I'm loving the questions you're asking because you're getting to the heart of it. So I'm going to go to your original question is, are people coming to me seeking something? It's a great question. I feel whenever you walk into any experience where you're bringing in a person that you don't know or a tool that you have not used, you are seeking something, right? So yes, the answer is people are always seeking something. Where it gets tricky, and I'm going to use the word again, is expectation. I have had many people come to me thinking it's art as a tool for healing. So they understand it here. But then when I do it, I'm touching this. They're like, oh, this is a lot deeper than I thought. It's usually the feedback you get it. Or I didn't know you were going to go there. And then sometimes it's the opposite. Some people, because they follow me on Instagram or they've read my book, they know I go deep, or they know that I go inward is a better way to say it. It's not about depth. It's about, they know that when they engage with me, I'm going to go inward. I want you to go inward. But what trips them up is then expressing it in the art part. So it's really fascinating because it's an expectation. They want to go deeper, they want to go inward, but then they think they have an expectation that you have to create a certain way that I'm going to be able to. And what happens, and this is the tricky part, is they're seeing my sketches and they think that's what they're going to do. I said, no, that's my expression. Yours may look and feel totally different, but what I'm trying to teach you is the fundamentals, the foundation of why I do what I do. Because I have to trust that you will make it your own. If I give everyone in the world a pen and paper and I ask them to express sadness, definitively everyone will express it different, even if the exact marks are exactly the same by some miracle, right? The energy and resonance of that mark is fundamentally different because it's my experience going into that mark. So when I say the unseen, I can look at a sketch and feel something very different than what you would feel. And you know this in a museum, in a gallery. Millions of people see the Mona Lisa. Hundreds of millions of people have seen the Mona Lisa. But we all have a different experience of it. And, often, and going back to expectations, you often hear people are disappointed when they see the Mona Lisa because it's behind this glass thing, and it kind of, unfortunately, people get disappointed because they have all this buildup of what they think it's going to be, and then they see it And that's what I mean by the hangups, right? So I'm just sharing all this because people come in seeking something, but if it's laced with expectation, that's what I'm going to help you. I have to help you release expectation because expectation's tied to outcome. You do not know what you're going to get. And then the last thing I'll say about my work is it's very intuitively guided. This is why I'm not an art therapist. Now, art therapists probably do use their intuition, but they have guidelines that they have to follow, or they'll lose their license, right? I mean, that's why they studied for as long as they did, and that's why they're accredited. I have reverence for that because I'm married to a psychologist and I have, I have that in my family. But the nuance of what I do is I don't have any of those things, which means I have the freedom to play in the intuitive nature of what I do much more freely than somebody that has much more, they have to make sure that they stay within the container of what they do. So that's why my guidance is different than an art therapist. Because I don't call myself an art therapist, but if somebody wants to package it that way, I understand. It's not what I describe it, but obviously there's a lot of parallels.
You mentioned the expectations being kind of that hurdle. I think again we're talking about the theme is expectations. It's the result that people are seeking, and they're not taking the time to slow down and enjoy the journey, which where the breakthroughs and things are, uh, those realizations will come for them. But I'm curious to focus on you. And how did you come to sketch poetic? But I guess that would be in its earlier form. How did you come to art to be this modality for catharsis, if I can phrase it this way?
Yeah, I love the word catharsis. You have a beautiful Artium. You have the beautiful way of speaking. So it makes me smile because I'm such a lover of words and languaging. And the reason I'm complimenting you on it is if I were to say the work that I do, the thing that brings me the most joy is when people start speaking more compassionately in their languaging. So cathartic is such a beautiful word. But your question about why I started sketch poeting, I'm just going to touch on everything we've talked about. I was very performance driven, a lot to do with my culture of being Asian upbringing. It's in our culture to be the best of the best and to make our family proud. And it's not unique to Asian cultures. A lot of cultures have this. And then at the peak of my professional career, so I got to the highest position that I had strived for. I was disconnected, not present, physically anxious, mentally disconnected, and spiritually I didn't have any faith really. I don't think I had any sort of spiritual practice. But externally I was considered and seen as very successful. People would be like, "Oh, Sheila's kicking ass," or "Sheila's doing so well." But inside I was completely in I was having a reckoning. So that's that. And it showed up with my fear of flying. But ultimately, what Sketch Poetic did for me is it connected me back to something I used to do as a kid when I used to draw. But I used to draw to disconnect because I had a very traumatic childhood. So I would draw to escape my life. And nobody told me, this is why I'm so passionate about what I do, is nobody ever told me to sketch or draw to connect. I just assumed I would disconnect because that's what I did. So when I started to sketch every day for the purposes of simply just releasing everything inside of me, and I just wanted to get it out because the hypnotherapist that I was working with for my fear of flying, which is why I even saw her, she had seeded this idea like, have you ever thought to sketch to connect? And I'm like, no. So when I started sketching every day, I just remembered her saying connect. I'm like, okay, let me connect back to myself. And what ended up happening, two big things ended up happening. I started finding the joy again in art because I didn't do it for anyone but myself. And the second thing that happened is I started to find the stillness and peace that I'm talking about, that feeling of being bored. The feeling of being bored is simply space to be still, the space to be silent, the space to just be. And I started to feel that in the act of creating. And then the last part was how I even started doing this as my purpose and my work is I was genuinely I had a kid like moment where I'm like, do people know art heals? like do people really know this? Because nobody had told me this. If somebody had told me the way that I'm talking about it now, truly, I think it would have changed my life. But clearly, that was not my soul path. My soul path was to be disconnected for a long time and I neglected my art for decades, neglected it. I might have dabbled here and there. And so, yeah, the reason I know I'm doing this work is not only did I answer the call to heal myself because I needed to, but then I became of service to others because one of my mantras is you cannot go inward and see what you see and not be of service to the greater good. It just happens. So when people say, I need to find my purpose, and they use the word purpose, it sounds so big, but really, it's not quite that big. It's what happens is if you can just go in and remember who you are, you realize, oh, this is what I was meant to do. And that could be anything. It could be being a parent. It could be being the best gardener in the world. It's not about what the world tells you purpose looks like. I happen to have a big purpose in terms of trying to heal the world, which is what I have in my head. But it doesn't negate somebody's purpose of raising their children in a way that makes them really beautiful and contributors to the society, right? That's as beautiful of a purpose as mine. So I'm just saying all this because that's what sketch poetic means to me. It's become my methodology, my way of being, and the essence of who I am.
Oh, there's a saying, and your reflection, your epitome of that. It's a saying: find something that you love, you'll never work a day in your life again. And that seems to be in my head. You're talking about this passionately about sketch poetic, this modality, something that you are brings you joy, and maybe that's kind of describing it as a natural state of being. It's the epitome of that. You're doing something that you probably otherwise would be doing if you weren't getting paid for it. Getting paid for it is very nice, and it's even better if you make a living for it.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better. And by the way, these cliches or quotes exist for a reason. It's wisdom expressed in a quote or, a piece of art. This is wisdom. All the stuff that comes through us, and even in this conversation and the things that I'm saying, I said it in the beginning, I'm the vessel for the unseen to be seen. The words that flow through me, I'm not looking to be original. I'm looking to remember what has always existed. And so I'm just letting me be the vessel for it. So the words that flow through me are words that have probably existed for dawns of time. What makes it unique, though, is my expression of it. So I'm expressing it as Sheila Darcey, and that's my expression. But the essence of it, I believe, has existed forever.
You touched upon an idea of this knowledge. I have heard it to be applied in different, I think it's towards music, like somebody, in a sense, like the best music has been created, and everything that's being created now is maybe more of just not repetition, but it's maybe just I want to say regurgitation, but not in a negative sense. It's just kind of that's why we have a lot of movies, remakes. There's no original thoughts. I think at some point, knowledge kind of accumulates up to a certain point, and maybe you can't create anything new. So it's okay to repeat things. But where does this knowledge reside with us? Because I've been always curious with this idea. Years back, I read something by someone called Anthony Peake, and he talked about our minds, our brains being kind of antennas to some
Mhm.
kind of signal. And where are we getting this knowledge? And maybe at certain cases, people come up, with two similar ideas, two similar inventions in different parts of the world at the same time. What are
Yeah.
they connecting to?
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
listen, I mean, that is the age-old question, I believe. In addition to God, who is God? What is God? Um, I don't think we could ever cover that in millions of podcasts because everyone has a different perspective and it's so subjective. I will just speak about it from an artistic perspective, which is why I said I express it the way I express it. My languaging is all about art and creativity. There is no question. I don't care what your spiritual belief is or what religion you associate with. You get someone in front of a painting or a piece of art that moves them. I guarantee you there's not one person that says something bigger is at play. How did this person do that? Whether it's the Mona Lisa or a piece of music that moved you, or somebody does a piece of choreography where you're bawling your eyes out at the end. Never, I guarantee you, never have I met anyone that wouldn't go, well, there's something bigger there. Because something moved them and they know it's not just that something like that person was just a vehicle for it. but they might not understand it and articulate it as spirit, source, God, consciousness is how I describe it as well. There's all different ways, and this is all English, by the way, might I add. I mean, let's just talk about that. We're talking about English. In other languages, there's many different ways to express certain things, experiences that English is limiting, if anything. But I'm saying all this because take language and aside, which is why I talk about the unseen, and I like how you've brought in unspoken. They're sitting side by side each other. Art or creative expression, dance, music, all of the above, is the closest thing we'll understand to what God feels like, in my opinion, because it's the pure act of creation and expression that is so, I'm going to use the word pure. When somebody is purely creating for the sake of it, it's like touching God. I genuinely describe it that way. You cannot and I don't even know what that looks like. It's just because it's so expansive and it's so pure and it just feels amazing to be in the presence of someone that is creating or has created something of such power that you stand in front of it and you go, wow, what is that? What did I just feel? Right? That to me is the essence of whatever it is you want to call God or whatever it is that you know is something bigger at play. That's what I talk about a lot. And it doesn't matter what your belief system is, you feel it. We've all felt it. There's not one person I've met that hasn't been moved by some sort of creative expression.
I couldn't agree more. I think, in my opinion, it's that if we're talking about God, deity, any kind of that kind of an idea, I think ultimately people are talking about the same entity in a sense, the same thing.
I
We're just coming at it
Yeah,
from different perspectives. But
I,
like
I like to think the same.
the I want to head in a certain direction with a purpose. Like to me, the purpose of this project, of this podcast, it's personal. Like I'm a believer. I came to believe that uh, you cannot know like pleasure with knowing a lot of pain. And I think individuals who try to find creative expression, some kind of modality that goes beyond that, maybe tries to connect them with the holy, so to speak, they've come from a place of a lot of hurt. And this is personal.
Yeah.
Of there have been a lot of experiences. I talked about freely before. Depression, suicidal ideation thoughts. I don't hide it. I've had these things in the past, but I think going through those experiencing and being lucky not having them ruin you and follow through on those ideas, you can probably find a greater purpose. But it's that idea of that pain is necessary. It's that maybe the greatest sense of discomfort, and if you can bear it, if you can move through that, you will come out better on the other side. And not everybody comes out of it. But I'm curious, in your experience, having what I'm seeing from my perspective, you definitely seems like come out on the other side. Maybe still a work in progress. I think all of us are. But what was that journey like that brought you to
Yeah.
Sketch Poetic? But what I mean is, I wanted to focus. I think you mentioned culture, upbringing, and
Yep.
for me, I come from Eastern European culture, which and I'm the youngest of three kids. Um, you know, my father was born like right after the World War II. He had me when he was 37, and kind of I feel there's a great disconnect generation. This is where I'm bringing in generational trauma, and this is not unique. A lot of people go through it, but some people are able to break that generational trauma, but some are not. And what did it look like for you?
Yeah. There's a couple of ways I'm going to answer that. And I'm genuinely loving our conversation right now. You're covering so much ground and important, important ground, might I add. So I'm going to give you a visual to answer your question because you asked two parts. What was my journey and how did I get through? When you say get through to the other side, how I interpreted that is how did I break some of the ancestral patterns that led me there? That's how I took it from reflecting back on what you said. There's a metaphor, sorry, there's a visual I give people when I talk about my sketch poetic journey, which often mirrors many people. So I was always told to be in the light. My culture said, I'm a proud Filipino woman, and my culture said, always be happy, be seen but not heard, make your family proud, Always, don't focus on sadness, don't express your emotions, just always be happy. And that's why Filipino people are often the nurses in the world and caregivers, because they're just always expressing that joy and happiness. That you already know the downside of that is we don't get to explore the shadows. So similarly to your metaphor of pain and pleasure, I'm going to use shadow and light. So that's the languaging I use. One of the fundamental pieces of wisdom that was given to me that has changed my life, to answer your question of breaking a pattern, is I believe there's shadow and light in everything. So if you're experiencing a light, there's always a shadow to it. So that's what I just said. I had a lot of light, but the shadow is I couldn't express all that was within me. I couldn't show imperfection. The shadow is I couldn't feel what I needed to feel, but I was expressing a lot of light. And then, so what ended up happening to me? So I'm going to give you the pendulum. The pendulum is my metaphor, or sorry, the visual. I was all in light. So then what happens? I find SketchPoetic. I go all in the dark. I couldn't wait to unpack all that trauma. Because in the past I avoided all of it. Like God forbid, I didn't want to touch trauma because I thought it'd be like Pandora's box. It's going to be crazy and I would never be able to come back. So when I found a vehicle or modality, as you best describe it, as a modality of creative expression, I go, oh, I can actually see this stuff and not be so scared. So I went all in the dark. And so when I went into the traumas and the darkness and started to understand why I was hyper and a perfectionist and a people pleaser, I got to see the light side of my darkness, right? So I got to play. Then guess where I am today? And this is where I'm coming back to. Is where I am today, 8 years into daily sketching. I've just celebrated my 8-year anniversary. I'm in the middle. And the reason I use the pendulum as the visual is in the scientific world, the pendulum has its most power in the middle because it is the merging of both extremes. And so the invitation, and this is what I guide people to understand, and this is not so much in my book, which is why perhaps there's a second book in me, is that I think people needed to be uncomfortable and feel discomfort. But what the invitation for me now is to sit both in the shadow and light and understand that they are both existing at all times, and to accept and find compassion and to be able to sit and be grounded in all of it. And so that's why it's so important. I believe the messaging of what I just shared with you is because the world is reflecting that to us. It is really hard to be in the middle right now, when the world wants us to be in the extremes, whether it's extreme views, extreme feelings, extreme anything. They want us to be up here. But we actually, using the same metaphor, we are the least powerful when we're in extreme of anything. We're the most powerful when we're at the center and when both have merged. So that's the invitation.
That's very interesting. I think this is one of the reasons, like this kind, what you just said, mirrors what I found in Eastern philosophy. Like I've before my son was born, shortly, I've happened to be in the 92nd Street Y, heard Deepak Chopra speak, and this is how I found, Dalai Lama books and Alan Watts subsequently. And what appealed to me it was that the middle way. There'll be times when things are going good. There'll be times when things are going bad. But the good times won't last, and the bad times don't last either. So you're kind of going back and forth. But ultimately, to be in the middle, not at the extremes. This is what I heard. That's the way, kind of try to be the middle way. So, and
Yeah, the middle. Yeah, and there's one more thing that I felt compelled to just contribute to this conversation is the fact that you and I, as male and female, are talking. That's including masculine, feminine energies. We are told by society, or they're trying to enforce this idea of you're male, or whatever gender you identify with, and this is how masculine is expressed, and I'm female, or whatever my identity is, and this is how feminine is expressed. But using the same metaphor I just used, there is masculine and feminine in all of us. And there's beauty in it, right? There's a softness to femininity and there's a strength in masculinity, but there's also strength in the feminine and there's also a softness in the masculine. They both exist, but yet somehow in the world, through languaging, through conditioning, we've associated soft with feminine, strength with masculine. And that is not, we know, you and I both know, just even in this conversation, that there's strength in me, there's strength in you, there's softness in you, and there's softness in me. And so when I say there's a merging and there's an invitation to sit in both, it is, I'm telling you, it is being expressed in every structure and framework that we have been told to live in. And gender is one of them. Sorry, I
I,
get passionate about
no, no,
this
no,
because
it's fine. If I were now, I'm thinking something. I feel feeling a little silly, but what you just said is encompassed in a symbol, yin yang, which I actually have
yeah,
tattooed on my shoulder.
no, and no, exactly. Beautiful. Because that yin and yang can be expressed as gender, it can be expressed as feelings, it can be expressed as ideologies, it could be expressed as anything, but I'm doing it like I have it. But again, ancient wisdom, ancient imagery, ancient symbolism. And just going back to what we said earlier, the reason I believe sketch poetic has become a much more present spiritual practice for me is wisdom is being shown to me in my mark making. So I see images, I see symbols, and I do wonder where they come from. So the question you asked earlier, I don't have an answer to in terms of definitive answer, but there is an inner knowing that is coming from some source of ancient wisdom.
I can't have help with this feeling is that we're talking about something just about one thing, but different sides, different perspectives. And this thing is kind of this idea of perennial philosophy. This knowledge has always been there since time immemorial. There's that phrase. But people just have, some people happen to discover that it's there. Now, I think this knowledge is there on such a level that may be incomprehensible, in a sense that it's so great, it can only be felt, it can only be experienced, it cannot be described in words. Because, like you said, language, English language, grammar language is probably not enough. You have to experience, and from there, the phrase I think the best sums it up is suchness. It's that idea that
Suchness.
it's this is why again this to me I draw back to Watts, to Eastern philosophies, Buddhism, and I think all religions do have all various areas, but everybody's talking about the same thing, and maybe somebody's talking about things in a more relatable terms.
Yeah.
But to me, I can't help to think, okay, we seem to be sharing a path towards trying to access that universal consciousness, this kind of
Yep.
this thing that's we know it's there, but we can't describe it maybe into each other, but we know what we're talking about right now. And
Yeah.
this like, but it's the work that you're doing is being the conduit, having people join that stream of universal consciousness. And they need, to me, I hear it no matter what modality, as I say, the vehicle that you get there to, you probably, when you're able to tap into it, you feel a sense of relief, of relief. Kind of, oh, this is the natural place in the universe.
Yeah. Absolutely. I feel compelled and intuitively guided to just say this one point because it's something that I am noticing too. Is you and I and anyone, if you ask people, give me someone that inspires you that speaks a similar languaging in philosophy, in art, in the spiritual, conscious, scientific realms. And I'm not making this a gender thing, but it's the truth. It is always a male figure that people have, whether it's Alan Watts, Deepak Chopra. I can name a slew of them, but 10% may be women. And I'm saying this to you for a reason. I see it in the art world. There's a artist named Tilma Klimt. I watched her documentary, and she did visionary art before before the surrealist movement happened. She never got credit because she ended up creating the art, and she said it's too early for its time. You have to watch the documentary; it's fascinating. She specifically, when she passed away, wrote in her will, "This art cannot be seen for 20 years." But sadly, I say sadly, but it was meant to be her soul path, is during that 20 years is when this huge surrealist movement happened. So she doesn't get credit for this movement because she didn't actually talk about it. She didn't put it out there. And I'm saying this not to make it about gender. What I am saying, though, is the reason I feel so compelled to talk about it is as a woman, and I'm turning 50 and I'm proudly excited about that. As a woman turning 50 that is of Asian descent, my expression of what we're saying, while the wisdom has always existed, somebody out there has to see it in this packaging. Just like somebody has to see it in your packaging, right? And when I say packaging, I'm not talking about just the physical packaging. It's all the experiences that you've had coming from the Eastern European background, sports, right? When you talk about it, someone will hear it differently because you're able to express it. I believe something is happening in that realm too, that women are just not seen in the intellectual, scientific, spiritual realms. That to me is doing a disservice to everyone. It's doing a disservice to everyone because we need to hear it. Men need to hear it from women, and vice versa. Women need to hear it from men, but in a way that is we can connect to the feminine expression of it in men. Do you see what I mean? I'm going back to that because I'm telling you, it's been coming up a lot for me, and it's this unseen stuff that I keep talking about. Why is the unseen not mirroring the seen world? The unseen world doesn't care about our gender. The unseen world doesn't care about our age and our culture and our religion. It's the seen world that does. So the day I know my work is creating the deep impact that I want is when the seen and unseen worlds overlap and people start to see each other beyond this, beyond what they see. They feel each other. They sense each other, like you were talking about the sports metaphor. You just know to throw the ball behind you because you know that person's there, right? The same idea. So that's, I'm putting it out there as much as a wish, but as much as what propels me to do the work I do.
And I'm glad to share this space, give you this space. And this is exactly why, I wanted to do this in the first place. It's like if putting out this content, putting it out there for somebody to see, yes, we're all unique human beings. We have our own unique experiences, but I think there is a little bit overlap in certain areas. And if somebody hears me say something that hits close to home with them and actually maybe makes a difference in a positive sense as a man, and maybe if somebody, you're the woman, you say something, somebody sees you in themselves or themselves in you, that would make a difference. And this is ultimately, this would have been all worth it. This is what I said
Yeah.
with Carlos and saying it here. If one person hears this and this makes a difference, and that's enough.
Yeah, exactly. And when Carlos connected us, I did my homework and I looked and I did research and saw your podcast with him. It matters to me that I'm co-creating with someone that is in alignment with my values and my belief systems in the sense of not belief systems in this in again external world, but who makes me feel like I can be myself and be in alignment with who I am, that I don't have to edit, I don't have to perform. I can just be authentically who I am. And even in the earlier conversations, I'm like, look, whatever's meant to come up is going to come up. I have complete trust in that because that's how I create. And that's how I move through the world is I just trust with even the technical difficulties we had beginning, starting all this, that was all meant to be because if anything, it probably got rid of any sort of like static of you coming in here with an expectation perhaps that this is how it was going to be and spirit's like nope, Artyom, you gotta get rid of that, so let's just create a disruption so you will be disrupted. I genuinely believe that happened for a reason, so everything that happens is intended so that we can get back to that place of true, you know authentic flow.
I do want to ask, what do you think about? And by the way, I do want to say this has been the most off script that I've been since I began doing this, and it feels comfortable. This does feel like a genuine conversation. And in a step in the beginning, I talked about the roles and labels, job titles we talk about, but this is that deep conversation going beyond the superficial that it's very uh, rare. I would think in the world, not unique, but it's rare for this to happen. And this feels like a natural conversation. But as two individuals who are traveling along similar paths, and no, not a destination, but the roads, and we're more interested about the journey. I'm thinking about the other people who are hearing this, and people who maybe not quite yet realized it. Maybe they realize something is open in their lives, but they haven't realized what exactly they're searching for. People come to you,
Yeah.
like, how do we amplify this message? It's that thing. I have this idea, like I know, you know, of for example, one of the things, sort of conflict with my parents. I know my disconnect because of generation, because of age. They went through certain things post-war that
Mm-hmm.
I simply cannot experience. But I'm going through things that I'm describing things in the language you understand, but it's out of their vocabulary. So how do we get beyond those kinds of barriers and amplify this message to make the world a better place?
No, I have a very succinct answer to this question because it's a question that I have asked myself in the past that fortunately I was guided to an answer that felt in alignment with me. As somebody that is so passionate and purpose driven, I've often asked myself the question you just asked is how do I amplify the very thing that I want to say? And I will just say that when I say I'm divinely guided, which is often how I describe what is happening, is the book that I wrote came to me. I'm not going to give you the whole story of how it came to me, but it came to me because I asked that question, how do I amplify what I'm learning in workshops? And somehow the book came. How do I amplify? And now I'm here and I go, how do I amplify this message that we're talking about? And I'm working on one of the biggest art installation pitches of my life. Somehow, and so I'm going to use the word co-create. The reason you and I are in flow in our conversation and dialogue is because your desire and intention comes from such a beautiful, pure place. You want to affect people's lives, right? So when I hear amplify, and I'm answering your question, but I want to get to the root of why you're asking it, is it's not about numbers. When I saw your podcast, I didn't care how many episodes you've done, how many followers you have, because I believe you have a unique voice and a unique story, just like I do. And I trust that the universe, consciousness, God, whoever is at work or whatever is at work, is going to come to you and listen to this podcast and hear my voice through you because that one person needed to hear it. It is that, again, probably another cliche quote you're hearing right now, but one person versus a million, that is an external measure. One person versus a million people is an external measure. You do not know what this one person is going to do with that knowledge. You do not know what that one person is going to do with that wisdom. And you certainly do not know what that one person is going to do if you change the trajectory of their entire life because we've said something that touched their heart and spirit. If you can go into every interaction with that belief that every single person matters, the amplification of one person is what you're doing, not the amplification of millions, 2 millions. And so the intention and energy in which you put into anything, and that's why when I sketch, I'm doing exactly what I just said to you. One page in my sketchbook means as much to me as an art installation that would be sitting in the Met. And I genuinely say that to you. The world may say being in the Met is much more powerful, much more amplification of who you are, because more people will see it. But I can't guarantee you there are people on my Instagram community that have touched my heart and soul because I know I affected them in a way that has changed their life. And if I die tomorrow, I would have done my work. And that's the energy in which I carry everything. And that is ultimately how we heal the world is everyone holds themselves accountable to one person. Hold ourselves accountable to us. And if we happen to affect one other person's life, how beautiful is that? If everyone had that feeling, you know how beautiful the world would be? So we're doing it. The amplification is already happening because the intention is there. The desire to affect the world is there. I really trust that.
Like you were saying in the beginning, not thinking about the destination. You're just kind of enjoying the journey and what you're
Yeah.
doing, tapping into that universal stream, the universe that we all are that we often forget. And I wish more people were able to tap into that deeper sense of who they are. And I know this is the work that you're doing with sketch poetic, allowing people to tap into that. And if they find meaning, if they find a sense of understanding of themselves, the place in the universe, I think you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in this universe, on this planet. And I know, this conversation is one of the most interesting conversations I had so far. I will be thinking about it. I will be unpacking it after we stop recording. But before we wrap things up, I would love for you to share where can people go to learn more about you and how to connect with your work.
Yes. So Instagram is where SketchPoetic was born on the digital. realm. So I started my SketchPoetic account on Instagram because I needed to be held accountable. So my entire purpose was trying to do it daily. And because Instagram is visual, I just thought, what a great way to be held accountable by having a timestamp that said every day I'm sketching. So I sketched every sketch in the beginning for years, probably 5 years. I'd actually post every day. But then it got tricky because I started to feel the audience and I started to be aware of them, and it kind of muddled things for me. So then I stopped posting every day. So now I post anyway, my point is social channels is a really active place for me. I post on LinkedIn and Substack. But if you just went to my website, you'll find the work that I do, sketchpoetic.com, and I do everything from art to workshops to intuitive readings and guidance. But if there's one thing that I want people to take away from the work that I do is, gosh, I just feel overwhelmed with what do I want to say at this moment in a way that summarizes everything we spoke about because we did cover so much ground. I keep hearing the word mirror and candle. We are all vessels of light. And if we can just allow ourselves to understand that our lights can dim or it can light up a world, but it really comes down to, do we even know we are vessels of light, even in the world of darkness that we in? There's just so much happening. I think that's why I had to pause there for a second, because it does not go unnoticed to me that we're having this beautiful conversation, but there's so much happening in the world that I'm surrounded by the energies of people. And, I live in LA and there was these recent fires, but there's just a lot of people sitting in fear right now. So if you're listening to this and you are moved by our conversation, what we're doing is we're having a moment of co-creative energy where we're sitting in both of our light, but also know that there's the shadows and darkness within us and around us. And that if you can find other people like that, community is such an important part of what I do. So please, thank you for the opportunity for having this platform. And if people find their way to me, I really appreciate the way that they're going to be able to find me, because we went straight into what I do and the way in which I show up. So yeah, that's how you find me. But it's more about the intention of why they're looking for me is what matters to me.
Of course. And Sheila, I will have all the Sketch Poetic links to social media, Substack, LinkedIn, in the show notes, in the descriptions, wherever this is posted, YouTube, Spotify, and Instagram, of course. And folks, to everyone listening, if something stirred in you during this conversation, I hope this will be an entry point to find that entry kind of realization that you are a vessel of light, and you don't need permission to begin. Just show up, and as always, continue to push yourself.
Yes, absolutely.